Okay, welcome to a special impromptu interview. I'm your host, Vincent Franchini from Tumblr House, with a very concerned Charles Coulombe.
Yes, an extremely concerned Charles Coulombe. Very concerned indeed. As many of you will know, on April 30th, a group of 15 very distinguished theologians issued a letter to the bishops of the world, asking them to respond to what they consider Pope Francis's guilt of the canonical delict or crime of heresy. Specifically regarding both sexuality and marriage, and also the unique truth of the Catholic faith. It's a 15-page letter. The fact that it's been done following a year or so after the last batch of theologians and 2 or 3 years after the Dubya, it's going to arouse a great deal of controversy, a great deal of verbiage jumping up and down. Before we get into the letter itself, there's something I would like to mention to you, my dear ladies and gentlemen, my devoted fan base. And that is one of the things about walking around Europe, especially the sites of battlefields or buildings where great things have been done and so on, is that you realize how quickly the hubbub and the shouting dies. I mean, 100 years ago and more ago, the trenches were signs of absolute horror, the like of which I have never experienced, and very few of you listening have experienced. Though, of course, being as old as I am, I heard stories about it from survivors. You go there now and there are parks. So one of the things I'm going to say to you right now before I get into anything else is that it's important to bear in mind that this too is going to pass. But all the confusion and horror and difficulty that you're feeling right now, about which we'll talk momentarily, when you look at past figures and you're inclined to judge them, remember that they were going through what you're going through now. Unlike you or me, they didn't know how the story was going to turn out. And they had to make choices and decisions and have opinions based upon what they knew at the time. And very often they made mistakes. That being the case, now you know what that's like. Be assured that the people whom you know, the people whom you interact with, and people you don't know, people above us, are going to interact and make mistakes. And we should try to exercise toward them the same sort of charity we ought to try to exercise toward past figures. During the Great Schism, when there were 2 and then 3 popes, one of the greatest minds of his age, St. Vincent Ferrer, backed an anti-pope. Well, he's a saint, and he was a great man, humanly speaking, and mentally. I'm certainly not going to pretend I'm as good a Catholic or as holy as St. Vincent Ferrer, and I'm certainly not nearly as smart. So if he could make a mistake, ladies and gentlemen, I can make a mistake. If I could make a mistake, you could make a mistake. So that being the case, it's very important that we try to deal, especially right now, with those who differ from us within the church as charitably as possible. That's the first thing, beyond everything else. Second thing is that there is no doubt that this does open the possibility for schism and for all sorts of upsetting occurrences. We know that in terms of the church's just war and just revolt against a tyrant theory, one of the key elements is only acting, if not acting, would bring about worse results. So we know that most often we've got wars, revolutions, etc. The results are worse than doing nothing. Not always. So you've got to use prudence here. Now, the 15 theologians involved are men of great stature, theologically speaking, but they have done what I have to call is the nuclear option. That is to say, I am sure that each and every one of them knows that this will destroy them professionally. Now, in the British system, the Commonwealth system, in places like Australia and New Zealand and Canada, you have a figure called the Governor General. Now, Governor General represents the Queen. And like the Queen, he basically does whatever he's told most of the time politically by the Prime Minister of the day. On very, very rare occasions, I can think of maybe 4 or 5 off the top of my head. On very rare occasions, the vice-regal figure, or viceroy is what you might call these people because they represent the Queen, may find a political situation so difficult, so horrifying, so threatening to the Constitution and the body politic, beyond and above any question of party, that they will exercise the reserve powers on behalf of the Queen to dismiss the Prime Minister, call for new elections, refuse to call for new elections, things of that nature, things that are very, very basic. Now, the thing is that whenever a Governor General does this, he knows he is destroying his political career. That's why it doesn't happen often. Because, again, and for their own reasons, no Governor General is going to do that unless not doing it is worse. It is the nuclear option. So too, I cannot imagine, especially knowing the weight and the strength of these theologians, I cannot imagine that they would do something like this, fully realizing that it will destroy them professionally. And those who are religious will, I have no doubt, be ruined. Unless they thought that their silence would lead to something worse. What's that something worse? I don't know. I know 2 of the theologians slightly. One of them I know fairly well. None of them I've discussed this with me, and I haven't discussed it with them, nor do I intend to. Just as the author of The Dictator Pope, I kind of presumed was an acquaintance of mine. Sure enough, he was. But at no time have I asked him about it. One doesn't do that, if you see what I mean. Maybe other people do, but I don't. And none of them saw fit to confide in me that they were going to do this. And I don't know what I would have said if they had. But I do know that one of the big rumors right now in Rome and in the theological establishment here in Europe is that the Pope intends to ordain deaconesses later this year. I don't know if that's true. It's a heavy rumor. It may well be that they have done this at this juncture. And this is surely, ladies and gentlemen, me guessing. I have no inside information, and I do not stand by what I'm about to tell you in the slightest, but I'm casting around in my mind for reasons. So this is all on the fly. But I suspect that dropping a torpedo like this was done in hopes that it might derail that. Because if that happened, if the Pope did indeed ordain deaconesses, we would be in a very, very horrible place. Because he would, not in so many words, he would have overthrown the nature of the sacrament of orders. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a world historic event, like the Great Schism, like the Arian heresy and Pope Liberius signing a semi-Arian creed, like Pope Honorius and the Monothelites, like John the 22nd, denying that the just will see God before the final judgment. These are the times that try men's souls. I hate quoting Thomas Paine, but it's the phrase that comes to mind. The biggest thing we have to do right now is to avoid allowing our emotions to become engaged. And there are several ways we could do this. First and foremost, we have to pray a lot more for the Holy Father, for the theologians involved, for the church itself. Go to the sacraments more, go to confession more, receive more, go every day to Mass if you can, pretend it's Lent. Pray your rosary a lot, all your other devotions. Pray to the Sacred Heart, pray to the Precious Blood, your guardian angel, all your favorite saints. Saints you don't even know, pray to them. Pray. Read the whole 15 pages before you even dream of commenting on it. Look them up, because they give lots and lots and lots of references. And, if this were happening 10 or 20 years ago, you'd kind of be stuck with whatever was written and whatever anybody responded. You're not now. So if you've got a question about something, they have footnoted it up the wazoo. So you have any question about anything, you look that up, you find out if they're telling the truth. Remember that your emotions are in play here. Certainly mine are. Everyone's are. And what are those emotions? Well, there are several. But at the bottom of them is fear. And it's the kind of fear that 4-year-olds have when their parents are fighting. Makes them irrational. It will make us irrational if we allow it to. What is at the bottom of that fear? Let's pull it out and look at it. That the Catholic faith isn't true. That's what's at the bottom of it. That all of this is nonsense. If the Pope is wrong, how do we know that any of it's true? The whole thing could be absolutely false. That is what is at the bottom of our fears. Now, fortunately for us, God has already acted on our behalf. Through who? Through how? Miracles. The Shroud of Turin, the Sudarium of Oviedo, you bet. But the Eucharistic miracles in the past 25 years. Whatever happens, ladies and gentlemen, God is still coming down on the altars every day, into the bread and into the wine. The truth that he revealed to the apostles in Galilee and in Jerusalem is still true. The infallible declarations of the popes and councils are still true. This is our bottom fear. We have to face it. And God has already answered it for us. Be still and know that I am God. That's what he tells us. We are in the boat, ladies and gentlemen. And Peter at the moment seems like a very unsteady steersman. And the waters are rising back and forth. And certainly our Lord seems as though he's sleeping. But, to quote Longfellow, I heard the bells on Christmas Day, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail. This will happen, ladies and gentlemen. I look around this old battered continent, and I see that it's happened time and time again. And if these are not the last days, it will happen again. We must pass through dark waters before we reach the sweet, as Van Helsing said in Dracula. As Samwise, stuck in Mordor, said, looking up and seeing the star, there is a beauty and a truth and a goodness that the darkness cannot reach. What must our ultimate answer to all of this be? To make sure that that light, that truth, that goodness, and that beauty live in each of us. Prayer and the sacraments, ladies and gentlemen. To the extent that we have to, we live in the moment. Read these 15 pages if you're up to it. Check your references. Do not become a creature of your emotions. Do not succumb to anger or despair. Exercise charity. Because the devil does go about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He's looking for Pope Francis. He's looking for the 15 theologians. He's looking for you and for me and for all of us that crawl upon this earth. And he will get us any way he can. He will get us through anger. He will get us through sloth. He will get us through what we do or through what we don't do. It doesn't matter, and he doesn't care so long as he gets us. But if, like St. Vincent Ferrer, like St. Colette, we cleave to the things that we know to be true and hold on to them first and foremost, then like them, one day we too shall sing with the saints, and Satan will be defeated. So, that, ladies and gentlemen, is what I take out of this current moment. I will read the 15 pages myself. I'm sure that in the next episode, we'll have more to talk about. I have no doubt a lot of you will have questions and so on and so forth. And you know what? We'll deal with this. We'll deal with it as Catholics always have. As our ancestors dealt with the Great Schism. They dealt with the Arian heresy. They dealt with all these things. And you know how we know this? Because we're here. You know, it's like when in other ways and so forth, people have asked me, how can you have children in such a difficult time when this and that's happening? My response, and again, it's because of history. In other words, what is history? It's the movement of the will of God through time against the backdrop of innumerable free wills. That's what history is. The Black Death, ladies and gentlemen, wiped out a half to 2/3 of the population of Europe. And our ancestors lived through that, and they had children on top of it. And they kept going. And that is what we have to do. The world wars, the Napoleonic Wars, the 30 Years' Wars, the innumerable famines. Ladies and gentlemen, we descend from survivors of horrors in church and state. They made it through, and we are the proof that they did. We too, if we persevere in our faith, whether we die as martyrs or we live to carry on and to pass the struggle on to new torches in other generations. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, we shall have won. So, with that, what else do we got? Any questions from the floor?
Okay, a little bit to unpack, because I have a little bit different take. Obviously the term open letter, for me, was reminiscent of certain previous actions by certain previous traditional Catholic publishers. On some level, obviously this is more grave, because you've got serious theologians. I guess we won't list names for this segment, but you've got very serious, well-respected theologians. But haven't we on some level seen this before by other publications? And it wasn't suicide on their part. It wasn't professional suicide. What makes this more grave?
What makes it more grave is that you see my colleagues in the Catholic press, and specifically the people to whom we're referring. This is our bread and butter news, and if you're the conservative variety, then jumping on every dereliction of duty from any bishop, priest, or pontiff is what we do. And I'm sorry to say that it's what keeps us in business. But for these men, the cool, calm, objective evaluation of Catholic teaching, not simply in terms of controversial issues, but in its totality, is generally speaking what these men do. And it's their life's blood. If you see, the world of the professional theologian is kind of a small one. And if you get blackballed, you don't work. It's that simple. I mean, at least you don't work in any respectable place. And that, some of the, a few of the names on the list are people for whom that wouldn't worry. But a lot of them, most of them, in fact, the overwhelming majority, I can only think of 3 or 4 who, well, not even that, 2 or 3, who wouldn't have a problem if they never worked in theology again. This will destroy them. And as far as the religious go, they'll be non-persons quicker than you can wink. Expelled from their orders, suspended from the priesthood, all kinds of terrible things. So this is, and again, these are men whom, as I know most of them, as I say, only by reputation, the few I know personally, these are not people who would do that for a lark. And they certainly wouldn't do it to bring attention to themselves. BSc theologians, by nature, are not people who seek the limelight. There are very few who have. And those who have aren't much good, till out of Chardin comes to mind. Archbishop Sheen, for instance, would hardly have considered himself a serious theologian like these men. I mean, he was a theologian, he was very articulate and so forth, don't get me wrong, but he was a rarity. Most theologians avoid the limelight so they can work quietly, churn out their books and articles, and do what they do. And teach. See, that's the other thing, is they won't be able to teach. And that, if you can't teach, you can't write for any pure, remember, they don't write as a rule for the popular press. They write for theological magazines. And usually their income is generated either by the order or by a college. And if they get a bad rep, that's it. Bye-bye, no more. And this is true, by the way, if you're in academia, if you're dismissed unjustly, it can still be the kiss of death for you. I remember not so long ago, a non-signatory of this piece, very fine literature professor, Catholic, Anthony Esselin, was dismissed from Providence College for just garbage, absolute monstrous garbage. And where could be employed? Well, only one of a few of only a small one of a handful of Orthodox Catholic colleges in the United States. Fortunately, they could take him. But I mean, this. So again, it's different from the others in that the others had in a sense, a financial dog in the fight. And I don't want to imply that my colleagues in the conservative Catholic press enjoy doing this stuff. But news is news, and news is what we make our living off of. With these guys, this is walking the plank.
Obviously, it's very different. I believe there are 4 priests that signed this, so that's a whole different situation for priests.
Oh, yeah.
And that's something new.
Well, see, that's the point. That's the point. That's why, listen, if I got together with a ton of my colleagues in the conservative Catholic press to say anything, it really wouldn't mean that much. Everybody would say, and they wouldn't be entirely incorrect, well, these guys have a dog in the fight. They make their living off controversy. Who cares what they think? True enough. But these guys don't.
Okay. So we unlike the Dubya, though, we don't have any cardinals signing this. So there's sort of a bigger gap here. We don't really have people who are authorities in a sense. So can't this simply be something that is ignored again? Where do we go from here? I mean, is there really more pressure on Pope Francis to do anything?
Well, that depends upon a lot of things, a lot of facts not in evidence, as the DA used to say in Perry Mason. We don't know. I doubt it. I doubt that the Pope's response, other than destroying them personally, I doubt that he'll make any response. They're toast, absolutely. But I don't think the Holy Father is going to respond. Now, mind you, I also don't know what kind of controversy, because whenever you've got a group of people, you don't know what they're connected to. You don't really know the ramifications. The Dubya was ignored. The last group of scholars to intervene was ignored. I think this will probably be ignored. If it may inspire a couple of bishops to do something or other, and they'll lose their jobs immediately. But, and here's the big but, it probably will not provoke any open response from the Holy Father. It may, if my supposition is correct, and the ordination of deaconesses or some other horror was in the pipeline, it might dissuade him from doing that. If there are other consequences, again, none of which I'd be aware of anyway. See, part of the problem here, frankly, is that a great deal of the action is going on off stage. So there's only a small amount that's available for us to really evaluate. I can tell you this much, though, and here I'm being brutally frank. Remember that the Pope's authority rests upon one thing and one thing only, and that is the unique right of Jesus Christ, the unique position of Jesus Christ as the sole means of salvation. If that is not true, if God does in fact will all religions, then the Pope can be ignored with impunity. Or to put this another way, if he believes what he says, then he is no one to judge. Then he has no right to judge. He has nothing to say that anyone needs to hear. If he believes what he said. And this leads into another question. One of the things, and I'm not going to really analyze the letter because I just gave it a quick once-over, but one of the things that did jump at me was this talking about the signature with the imam. And it says, and they mention the fact that you could interpret that 5,000 different ways if you wanted to. But, and the Pope has unofficially sort of said this or that about something or other. But the problem is, what did the imam mean by it? Surely if the Pope is an honest man, he would only sign something with the imam that the imam meant by it. Otherwise, he's dishonest. That was something I hadn't really thought about because, of course, I've gotten very much in the habit of trying to find orthodox explanations. But you do have to remember context. And if I am knowingly signing an agreement with you, and I knowingly intend not to mean what you mean by it, I'm lying. Now, that also brings us another issue, and that is that the imam, for signing it, Islam does not believe that God wills all religions. Believes that Allah only wills Islam. So the question then is, was the imam, and bear in mind too, it's not as though the imam had a position in the Islamic hierarchy, which doesn't exist, that analogous to that of the Pope. I mean, the whole thing is so screwy. This is why, there's an old saying, an old Latin saying, which in English runs, what is permissible to Jove, to Jupiter, is not permissible to an ox. But the reverse is also true. What is permissible to an ox is not permissible to Jove or Jupiter. And this, part of the problem with the egalitarianism that's such a huge part of the Pope's generation's mentality, is that it cuts both ways. Those in authority think they have rights that they lose by virtue of being in authority. The Pope, I mean, I could put on a bunny suit and go walking down the street if I felt like it. The Pope doesn't have that right. The Queen doesn't have that right. The President doesn't have that right. Now, who enforces these rights and wrongs? God. But, I mean, I'm not in a position to go up to the Pope when he's running around the Piazza San Pietro in a bunny suit. I can't go up to him and tell him, you have no right to be wearing that bunny suit, get in your white dress now. I can't do that. Nevertheless, he lost the right to wear the bunny suit. But that's something not just himself, but that generation when they're in authority, they refuse to give up those rights.
Do you, you might not feel this is a relevant question, but do you feel there was a need to send Pope Francis, or, well, I guess it was to the bishops, do you feel there was a need to do this open letter? Did Pope Francis essentially force our hand in this? Or are you sort of sad, and should people be more patient?
I don't know. I don't know because I don't know what they know. See, this is why I'm telling you, as I said before, I don't know what they know. I know the rumors I hear.
Wouldn't they have publicly disclosed what they know? I don't understand.
Not necessarily. A lot depends upon who they know it from.
I mean, these people aren't close to Pope Francis, and it's a matter. They're putting on trial a matter of public information, are they not? I don't understand.
But they are close to people who are close to Pope Francis.
But wouldn't all that information be irrelevant?
Not necessarily. See, again, you want definite answers to these questions. What I'm telling you is there aren't any. I can only presume, given the usual caution with which most of these men proceed in everything.
Okay.
I can only presume that they knew something that forced their hand.
Okay, so you floated the one hypothesis, very loose hypothesis, which is This is a preemptive strike. If very there was loose. Some insider information that the women deacon plan had more substance to it.
Yeah.
So this might have been an attempt to discourage the Pope from moving forward. Okay, that's
possibly, but see, that's a very loose hypothesis.
Very loose.
Just the right phrase.
Very loose.
And again, I have to emphasize, if the only way in which their action would be justifiable is if they believed that not doing it would be worse.
Well, that's true, but that reminds me of a previous segment, or a previous episode when we were talking about World War I.
Yeah.
And you cited one of the reasons where World War I happened is because people forgot the horrors of war. And so to what extent does that make it easier for these gentlemen to pull the trigger on this, not knowing the horrors of schism?
Well, I think one of the differences between the example I used is that these men are all very, I mean, they're better, some of them are better historians than I am by a long shot. It would be very difficult for me to believe. Remember, thankfully, we're not talking about gunfire. We are talking about schism and so forth. I mean, I can't help but believe that they knew what they were doing. I mean, I'm in the unfortunate position of having to hope they were wrong, of having to hope that they misjudged the situation. That's what I have to hope. But if they didn't, if they felt that they had to go ahead and do it, then we really are in a very serious predicament. And it makes it all the worse in that we can't really know the nature of that predicament. Moreover, if this thing succeeds, we're probably never going to realize it.
Okay, we're in a very serious predicament, but we don't know the nature of it. So if we don't know the nature, how can we know it's serious?
Because men of this caliber would not be doing something of this sort unless they were willing to ruin themselves.
Well, I'm talking about in terms of the fallout. I mean, what is the worst case scenario in the macro from this?
Worst case scenario?
Yes.
If a group of bishops took it to heart and reprimanded the Pope for heresy, and then lost their positions over it and refused to leave them. Now, would that be a bad thing? Well, it depends on whether or not the Pope was really guilty. I mean, see, when these things have happened in the past before, and this we tend to forget this because we like to gloss over these episodes, but like our deepest fears, we have to pull them out and look at them again. You ask yourself, well, how did they get solved? Oddly enough, they never got solved in an easy manner. You have had groups of bishops excommunicating each other before on several occasions. We certainly had the wonderful period of the 2 and then 3 popes, the Great Schism. We had the pornocracy, of course, which is one of my favorite periods because it was worse than this one. But how did each of them get solved? Well, they got solved by outside intervention. That's how they got solved. The Great Schism was ended by the Emperor Sigismund. He said, all right, that's enough. We've gone on 50 years, however long it was, with 3 popes. We're not doing this anymore. And he basically knocked their heads together and called the Council of Constance. How did the pornocracy end? Emperor Otto I marched into Rome and said, guess what? It's all over now. We're not doing this.
Okay, well, we don't really have that same sort of temporal authority figures at our disposal.
No, we don't. But what I'm saying is, again, look a little bit more macro. We don't have that sort of temporal authority. What I'm saying is that it's quite possible, if we get into that situation, that it will be an outside force of some kind that solves it. It could be, I don't know, a plague. We lose 4, if Ebola becomes easily transmitted and 5/6 of the world's population die, that'll solve the problem right there.
You know what? I thought of an interesting thing the other day. I thought, because I'm remembering you said something about how popes switch. I forgot. In the 19th century, one of the is it Pius IX switched? Yeah. He was very liberal, but then he saw someone's death.
Yeah, he saw Cardinal Count de Rossi, his prime minister, slaughtered in front of him.
And I thought of the possibility, because if perhaps, I mean, obviously, my mind just is, wanders. But if Pope Benedict happened to die before Pope Francis, there's a funeral, and Pope Francis sees, this is me in a couple years. You know what I mean? Like, he sees it. So I don't know. I'm just brainstorming. Yeah, I guess that's wishful thinking on my part for Pope Francis to change, where you see where he has a change of heart and the potential for something to facilitate a change of heart. So it sounds like if things just remain as they are, it's okay. But you're worried about this igniting something in the bishops or in some movement.
Well, it could, and also bear in mind, this isn't just an isolated incident. And firstly, remember something else. Nothing like this happened under Pope Benedict. Nothing like this happened under John Paul II. It never even happened under Paul VI. The closest you got was Archbishop Lefebvre. There's been nothing like this. Now, you have to stop for a second, okay? The shredding of the Franciscans, the Immaculate, several other orders, the gutting of various curia departments, the Dubya, the theologian's critique of a couple of years ago, this thing, the Vagano letters, the McCarrick revelations. Everybody around this guy seemingly is either a thief or a homo. Now, and we know it in a way we never knew it before. Now, you've got to stop and ask yourself, making every possible allowance for the Holy Father. Is it possible that he himself, his personality, his way of doing things, has some connection to all of this? This never happened before. It shouldn't be happening now. Why didn't it happen with Benedict? He got WikiLeaks. That was it. And WikiLeaks didn't reveal much about it at all. Just that, there was some financial shenanigans. We've known about those forever. No, we are at a very strange situation. And to be honest with you, and again, you know me, you've known me, and ladies and gentlemen, this is in the interest of full disclosure. You've known me since you were 8 years old. Have you ever known me to be a catastrophist or a seeker after the apocalypse?
Well, definitely no. Now,
I have to admit, I've never been a believer in the prophecies of St. Malachi. And, I always, when Benedict was elected, my joke at the time was, well, there can't be anything to it because the glory of the olive would have been Cardinal Martini, obviously. Thank God he wasn't elected. But I will admit that this one is supposed to be the last pope, Peter the Roman. And I said when he was elected, whatever kind of a man he turns out to be, I can't wait till he's dead and his successor is elected, because that'll be the end of St. Malachi. We'll just put him away, lock him up, no more. However, I am still not an apocalypticist, but as any Catholic must, I have to accept the fact that the end of the world is going to come one day, sooner or later, and it may come in my time. No man knows the day nor the hour. But people have felt that before. St. Vincent Ferrer called himself the angel of the apocalypse. Pope St. Pius X wrote that he had to believe that the Antichrist was already alive on earth. Well, not then, not yet. So all of these things are playing around in my head, and I'm sure they're playing around in other people's heads as well. But I also remember, and this is the beauty of history, that the church has come through everything. And I, once again, would remind our viewers and listeners of the Eucharistic miracles of the past 25 years, all 5 of them. The screwier and scarier it all gets, the more we should go to Mass and receive communion. The more we should make our confessions and all the rest of it, as I went on about earlier. Because honestly, we don't know the circumstances. We don't know the situation. The battlefield is raging in places we can't see. But these things I mentioned, we can be sure of.
I have to admit my reaction to the letter is not at the same sort of alarmist level that you're at. But maybe I'm misreading, because to me this is one piece of a long, slow train wreck. It's just one piece. Now you seem to suggest that this is a much bigger piece. This is a much more serious thing than the Dubya. See, because your reaction right now, I don't know if you reacted to the Dubya even in the same fashion, which is surprising to me. See, that's very surprising to me. What makes this more grave than the Dubya? Because the Dubya is from cardinals, and this is from people who are not in authority.
No, it isn't, but it is an accusation of the crime of heresy by very reputable and respectable theologians.
Well, that happens all the time on social media in more off-the-cuff fashion.
That's off the cuff. That's off the cuff, and it's all sorts of people. See, this is the problem with social media. We tend to forget that everyone's opinions are not equal. You could get 1,000 people to come out for anything on social media or against anything. What we have forgotten, and this goes back to this egalitarianism the generation of 68 pushed on us, and which social media, you got your opinion, I've got my opinion, and they're of equal weight. Actually, no, they're not. Because, you've studied this stuff. You've been to college. You've been to several places. You've written books about it. You've thought about it. I just look at a headline on Facebook. My emotions get involved, and I just have at it. No. Our opinions are not equal. Yours is much more important than mine. And not only that, I could get a lot more people who've got my lack of background to agree with me than you can to get to agree with you. Why? Precisely because you studied this thing, you've got some background in it. You're not going to jump to hasty conclusions and come up with one-sentence taglines that get people excited. But me, on the other hand, I'll have an army behind me. But you know what? We'll be an army of morons, because you still know better than we do. And this is something we've forgotten. Social media tends to put out of our heads. Now, these 15 men are not just any Joe Blow off the internet, nor are they journalists like myself who make their living off controversy. No. These are men willing to destroy their lives to file a canonical charge of heresy. And these are not internet chatters. They are not journalists. These are very good, strong theologians.
Obviously, the charge of heresy is more serious, but I mean, this already sort of happened in a sense on a different level with Dictator Pope, where...
Yes, but that was Dictator Pope. And who was John Sire, the author of Dictator Pope? Brilliant scholar, but he's an historian. And he was, and you're right, that was a big deal. And it was a huge deal. John Sire was willing to immolate himself. And that's why I thought it was a big deal at the time.
It's a huge deal, but it's not end of the world type Peter the Roman last Pope deal.
No, that would be ordaining deaconesses. I mean, this is the problem.
Well, now, why are you... Because haven't we said this before? Now, I remember on a previous episode, I was more worried about something in terms of... I forgot what they asked the Pope. They asked the Pope so many stupid questions, like, oh, can a priest marry or whatever? And I sent the question your way, and you seemed to dismiss it and saying, yeah, sure. The Pope saying, yeah, sure. We'll get a commission. And why is it different now for you? How come back then you felt the Pope was dismissing it, but now alarm bells are ringing?
Well, what changed my mind on it, usually you in this sort of thing, if you want to sort of shut people up and push them aside, you appoint a commission to inquire into whatever they need, and then that's the end of it. However, I know people who are connected to the commission that he appointed to look into it. And I know what they found. What they found was that there was absolutely no background for the ordination of deaconesses in the history of the church. Quite the contrary. And he took their report and he shelved it. Now, bearing in mind the kinds of things he does what he wants to do. He doesn't care. Never has. So the fact that A, the commission reported, B, that nothing was said about it in public, C, the fact that he shelved it and dismissed it, that says to me that there might very well be something to the rumors. Because it's in keeping, he doesn't say he's changing anything. He just does stuff. Like washing the feet of women on Maundy Thursday. You got to bear in mind, he doesn't have at least from outward appearances, he doesn't have a very strong grasp of Catholicism anyway. And these fine distinctions and so forth between actions and words are sometimes lost on him. seemingly, allegedly, apparently, all those qualifiers. Because I can't claim to know his mind or even that he has one. I presume he does, but he himself has said that the Holy Spirit gave him the gift of unawareness and that he doesn't know what he's doing. Well, if he doesn't know what he's doing, none of the rest of us do.
Okay.
And again, as with the Imam, maybe he was lying. I mean, time and again, he puts you in the position of having to decide, well, is he wicked or is he stupid? And I refuse to make that decision, by the way. It's not mine to make. But that's not a position we should be put in. If it weren't for our sins, which is the only possible justification for all this horror, is our sins. Other than that, they have no right to put us through this. Not the Pope, not cardinals, not bishops, all the way back to Paul VI. They had no right to play with the liturgy and the devotional life of Catholics, to say nothing of the dogmatic life of Catholics. These people exist for one reason and one reason only, and that is to give us the truths of the Catholic faith, doctrinally, liturgically, morally, devotionally. That's the only reason they exist. They have no other reason to be taking up space and taking our money. Now, it's not our place, for the sake both of clerics past and clerics yet to come, to simply kick them in the rear and toss them out. We have no place to toss them anyway. But morally speaking, they have no right to put us through what they have put us through. The Holy Father doubtless means well, whatever that means. But it does us no good at all if he does wrong. Again, he wouldn't have the right to wear a bunny suit in St. Peter's Square.
Well, okay, that's pretty much all of my questions I had today. I will try to do my positive spin on this, because I guess you can turn any tragedy into a happy thought, and I guess perhaps the happy thought, at least for me, you talked about fear. This creates a fear in everybody. One of the things I notice, at least in my personal life, is fear exponentially amps up my amount of prayer time. When things are good, it makes me very happy to give prayers of thanksgiving. But without fail, it's when things are falling apart that I amp up my prayer time exponentially. And so I hope that is the case for the entirety of the church through this crisis, is that we need to amp up our prayer time exponentially. This is as you say, I don't know what the huge ramifications are from this, but after listening to you, I'm certainly I'm certainly a lot more concerned than I was before listening to you. And so that's definitely going to get me to amp up my prayer time for this.
Well, that's, and again, too, our faith should come out of this stronger in the sense of meditating on the miraculous. As I said earlier, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. Put not your trust in princes refers to princes of the church as well as anything else. If your faith is based upon men, if your faith is based upon the idea that the Pope is always right, I'm not talking about infallibility now, but that he's just always right, or your faith is based on the idea that one of your favorite theologians who might have signed this thing must be right, you're basing your faith on a man, and you'll always be disappointed. Base it on the revealed truths. Base it on the miracles of Our Lady and the saints and the Blessed Sacrament. Base it on the tangible. And this will pass. Whether it's the end of the world or it isn't, this will pass. And we have to keep our eyes on the prize, as they said in the old civil rights song. Our eyes on heaven. Where sin abounds, grace abounds more greatly. And I have no doubt that the St. Vincent Ferrers and the St. Colettes of the future are being minted as we speak in this horrible fire. Let's hope it's us.
Well, that reminds me of my favorite prophecy, probably the most inspirational Catholic thing you can imagine. I believe it came out of Saint Louis de Montfort.
Yeah.
And it was that the saints of the latter times, he said, will, compared to the old saints, they will tower over them like the cedars of Lebanon to a shrub. Quote unquote, you could quote that part, because I remember the imagery used, the cedars of Lebanon to a shrub. And I've thought about that so much, because I thought, how could that be? You know, the old saints suffered so much. There was so much they had to endure. But at the same time, we are afflicted. At the same time, we are afflicted with temptation on demand all the time. The stuff that we have to go through, and that we have to battle on a daily basis, they didn't have to go through. And you said where grace abounds, or wait, what did you say?
Where grace abounds, where sin abounds, grace abounds more freely. That's it.
Yeah, I believe we are living in, there's never been a more evil time, but there's never been a time where there's more grace has been showered upon us. And it's that grace that makes, only God can make a saint. Isn't that what they say? Only God can make a saint. And the grace is there to make the greatest of saints nowadays. It's such a time of opportunity spiritually to access those graces and to triumph, to take all the challenges of our day and overcome.
Yeah, absolutely true. Let's hope that we all do. May we all meet merrily in paradise, as St. Thomas More says.
Yeah.
It's I don't suppose this would be a good time for me to ask for a day off for the commissary crew, security, the secretarial pool, and everyone else.
No.
Not a good time?
Not a good time, Charles. Not a good time. Know your role, Charles.
Sorry.
Not a good time.
I forget sometimes.
Okay, right, so any final words, Charles, to our audience?
Yeah. We'll get through this, gang, and we'll get through it together. As long as we're able to comment, we'll try to give you something approaching sanity. Sometimes it's a very far approach, and don't hang in there, kids. Our Lord was crucified on the cross and then rose again, and we ourselves in our lives have to be crucified and shall rise again. As will the church. The church is the mystical body of Christ. Every so often she goes through these things. But God is still in command. It's his church, not ours. He knows what he's doing. Just stick close to the Mass, the Rosary, confession, and try not to be worried.
Okay.
We're all in this boat, no matter how hard the storm hits. Christ may look like he's sleeping, but he's not.
Okay. All right, that'll do it. Thank you for joining us in this special interview, and we'll see you next time, ladies and gentlemen.
Ciao, ciao.